The cold did not fall softly that night. She was tired in the way that goes past the body. The kind of tired that settles into your jaw, your eyes, the small of your back, the kind that comes not just from working 2 jobs, but from spending years being the person that room's empty around. Her natural hair was pulled back, a few damp curls loose around her face from the snow that had been falling since her second shift ended. She didn't bother fixing them. There was no one to fix them for. She took the shortcut. She always took the shortcut. The alley on Decatur Street shaved 4 minutes off the walk to the bus stop, and 4 minutes mattered when your feet felt like this. She had taken it on 100 nights exactly like this one, cold, quiet, head down, invisible. She had learned a long time ago that invisible was safe. Invisible meant you didn't have to fight for space you were never going to be given anyway. You just moved through the world like water, filling whatever was left, taking up as little room as possible, and you got home in one piece. Tonight, the alley was not empty. She heard them before she saw them, the shift in the air, the low sound of a voice that wasn't talking to her yet but was about to be. 2 men, then a third stepping out from a doorway she hadn't clocked. She knew the type. She had been knowing the type since she was 15 years old. The crew that had been bleeding this neighborhood dry for months, collecting from shop owners, running product through the side streets, and making very clear to anyone who got too close to their business that they had a long memory and no patience. Last Tuesday, on her way back from her first job, she had seen something in that alley she was not supposed to see. A handoff. A face she recognized from the news. She had kept walking, eyes forward, heart hammering, telling herself they hadn't noticed her. They had noticed her. Hey. The voice was flat, conversational, which made it worse. We've been looking for you. Her body made the decision before her mind did. She ran. Out the other end of the alley, left on Decatur, the backpack slamming against her spine with every stride, her breath tearing out of her in ragged clouds of white. She could hear them behind her, not running yet, not needing to yet, and that unhurried confidence was the most terrifying thing of all. They weren't chasing her because they didn't have to. They knew this neighborhood. They knew every exit. She came out onto a wider street, lit and breathing, and she stopped. Not because she was safe. Because of him. He was standing outside a restaurant she had walked past a dozen times without ever once thinking she could go inside, dark stone facade, no sign, the kind of place that didn't need one. He was tall, and the snow on his shoulders looked like it had landed there as a courtesy, not an imposition. Dark suit, white shirt open at the collar, short black hair slightly damp at the edges. He was on his phone, speaking in low, even Korean, and he had the particular stillness of a man who had long since stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. He was dangerous. She could feel it from 10 feet away, not in a way that made her want to run from him, but in a way that made the air around him different. Denser. More deliberate. She did not know his name. She did not know that he was Kwon Hyun-shik, that the restaurant behind him was one of 17 businesses that existed specifically to move money through this city's bloodstream without leaving fingerprints, that the men currently rounding the corner behind her would sooner step into traffic than step into his line of sight. She did not know any of that. She only knew that he was the only solid thing on this street, and she was out of options, and she had spent her entire life making herself small and quiet and easy to overlook, and she was done, just for this one moment. Just for tonight, she was done with that. She walked straight to him. He looked up from his phone. His eyes, dark, level, giving nothing away, landed on her face and stayed there. Not through her. At her. Like she was something worth the full weight of his attention, which was not something she was used to and which hit her somewhere unsteady. Her hand tightened on her backpack strap until her knuckles ached. The men from the alley had stopped at the corner. She could feel them without turning around. Please, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. Stay with me tonight. Just, stay here. Right next to me. Please. The words were desperate. They were embarrassing. They were the bravest thing she had ever said out loud to a stranger. He did not move. He did not speak. He looked at her, really looked, the way people almost never looked at her, and she watched something shift behind those composed, unreadable eyes. Not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. Something more like recognition. Then he ended his phone call. He stepped forward, not back, not away, and stood beside her. Close enough that his arm nearly brushed hers. He said nothing. He simply redirected his gaze, slow and deliberate, to the men at the corner. They looked at him. They left. Just like that. No confrontation, no exchange, no sound. They simply turned and walked back the way they came, as though they had somewhere else to be, as though this street had never been their plan at all. The snow kept falling. Bianca stood very still, her heart a frantic, trapped thing behind her ribs, her breath slowly returning to something resembling normal. She became aware, in the aftermath of the fear, of how absurd this was, a girl in a too thin plaid jacket and a gray hoodie, a backpack full of a life that barely fit anywhere, standing next to a man who looked like the city owed him money. She waited for him to ask what that was about. To demand an explanation, to make this transactional, to be a person who needed something back. He looked down at her. His expression had not changed, still composed, still precise, still the face of a man who processed the world at a temperature several degrees below everyone else. But his eyes were still doing that thing. That looking at her thing. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was low, unhurried, accented in a way that made the simple question feel deliberate. She blinked. Of everything he could have said, that was not what she had prepared for. "No," she said. No. Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Where are you going?" She almost laughed. "Nowhere safe," was the honest answer. Home to an apartment where her roommates made her feel like a guest who had overstayed, on a street where the men who'd just left her alone would eventually stop leaving her alone. Nowhere that would hold her through the night. Nowhere that was actually hers. "I don't know," she said instead, because it was true, and she was too tired to dress it up. He looked at her for another long moment. She got the sense that this was a man who did not make decisions carelessly, not small ones, not large ones, not any of them. Everything was weighed. Everything was considered. "Come," he said. It was not a question. It was not a threat. It was the most straightforward thing anyone had said to her in months, and she followed him, this stranger with snow on his shoulders and danger in his stillness, because she had learned a long time ago to recognize the difference between the kind of danger that hunts you and the kind that stands between you and everything that does. She did not know yet what he had seen when he looked at her. She did not know that in 30 seconds, in the space of a single impossible ask, he had already noticed something that the people who had known her for years had never bothered to find. She did not know that this was the beginning of something neither of them had a name for yet. She just followed him out of the snow. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, no one was coming after her. The men at the corner did not linger. She felt the exact moment they decided to leave, a shift in the atmosphere, like pressure dropping before a storm reverses course. She didn't turn to watch them go. She didn't need to. She could feel their absence the same way she had felt their presence, that particular quality of threat draining out of the air like heat through a broken window. 1 second they were there. Then they weren't. And the street exhaled. Hyun-shik didn't watch them either. He had already looked away, as though their leaving was never in question, as though the only thing worth his attention now was the problem directly in front of him, which, she realized with a jolt of something between gratitude and unease, was her. He slid his phone into the inside pocket of his jacket and turned from the restaurant entrance without a word. He didn't gesture for her to follow. He didn't look back to check if she would. He simply started walking, unhurried and certain, in the direction of a black car idling at the curb 20 feet away, a car she hadn't noticed until now, which told her something about the state she'd been in when she arrived on this street. She followed him. She wasn't sure what else to do. A man got out of the driver's side as they approached, broad-shouldered, silent, with the practiced neutrality of someone paid to see everything and react to none of it. He opened the rear door without being asked. Hyun-shik stepped aside, a fractional movement, just enough to indicate she should get in first. It wasn't gallant exactly. It was simply efficient, the way everything about him seemed to be. She got in. The warmth hit her like something physical, immediate and almost painful after the bite of the cold outside. The leather seat was dark, the interior immaculate, and it smelled faintly of cedarwood and something clean she couldn't name. She pulled her backpack onto her lap out of instinct, holding it the way she always held it, both arms wrapped around it like a thing worth protecting, which it was. It contained her laptop, her work ID, and $43 in cash, which was most of what she had until Friday. Hyun-shik got in beside her. The door closed. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, without instruction, as though the driver already knew where they were going. She waited for the questions to start. They didn't. He sat with the same stillness he had carried on the street, one arm resting along the door, his gaze moving to the window, watching the city pass with the mild attention of a man on a route he had taken 1,000 times. He did not ask her name. He did not ask who those men were or what she had done to earn their interest. He did not ask where she lived or what she needed or what she expected from him now. He simply sat beside her in the warm, quiet interior of the car, and said nothing at all. She didn't know what to do with that. She was accustomed to silence that demanded something, silence that was withheld speech, withheld warmth, the kind that came with a bill attached. The silences in her apartment when she came home too late or ate the wrong food or existed too loudly for the people she shared walls with. The silence of teachers who looked past her in classrooms, of managers who spoke over her in meetings, of people who simply could not locate her as someone worth addressing directly. Those silences all had the same texture, indifferent, faintly contemptuous, a reminder that the space she occupied was borrowed and could be recalled at any time. This silence was different. It asked nothing of her. It simply was, the way the warmth in the car was, the way the leather seat beneath her was, present, steady, not requiring her to justify herself to it. She looked at him in profile. The sharp line of his jaw, the composed set of his shoulders, the snow that had left faint damp patches on his collar before the warmth evaporated it. He was looking out the window and there was nothing performing about it, no calculation she could detect, no waiting. Just a man letting her be afraid without making it her fault. She was still afraid, she realized. Not of him, exactly, though she hadn't quite ruled that out. She was afraid the way you stay afraid after the immediate danger passes, residually, in the body, a tremor that hasn't gotten the message yet that it can stop. Her hands, wrapped around her backpack straps, were still not entirely steady. But underneath the fear, quieter and more surprising, was something she hadn't expected to feel tonight. Relief. Not the thin, provisional kind she usually allowed herself, the kind she kept small so it couldn't be taken away and hurt on the way out. Something more substantial than that. She was in a warm car moving away from the street where men had looked at her like a loose end, and the person sitting beside her had made them leave without raising his voice, without violence, without asking her for a single thing in return. She pressed her back against the seat and let herself, just slightly, unclench. Outside, the snow kept falling over the city, covering everything in the same patient white, the alleys and the restaurants, the streets she knew and the ones she didn't, the life she'd been living and whatever came next. She didn't know yet which kind of danger she'd stepped into. But for now, for this one strange mercy of a moment, she was warm. The apartment was on the 14th floor of a building that had no name on the outside, just a number pressed in brushed steel beside a door that required a keycard to open. The lobby had marble floors and a single security desk, and the man behind it nodded at Hyun-shik the way people nodded at weather, acknowledging something they had no intention of questioning. She counted the floors in the elevator. She didn't know why. Something to do with her eyes that wasn't looking at him. She stepped inside and stopped. It was clean. Completely, almost severely clean, not the clean of a place recently tidied but the clean of a place that was not really lived in. The furniture was dark and minimal, a sofa, a low table, 2 chairs arranged near a window that looked out over the city from a height that made the streets below look like something theoretical. A kitchenette ran along one wall, its surfaces bare. No photographs. No books left out, no jacket thrown over a chair back, no evidence of a person in the particular unconscious way that people leave evidence of themselves everywhere without meaning to. The apartment held no warmth in the human sense, only in the physical one. The heating was on, the temperature carefully maintained, and it felt like stepping from the cold into a place that had been waiting. "You can stay until morning," Hyun-shik said. He was standing just inside the doorway, making no move toward the interior of the space. He said it the way someone might recite the terms of something, clear, complete, no room for misreading. "There is food in the refrigerator. The bedroom is through there." A small indication of his head toward the door on the left. "You will be safe here." She turned to look at him. He was already reaching back for the door handle. "Thank you," she said. The words felt inadequate for what they were supposed to carry, but she had never been good at finding bigger ones for moments like this. She was better at enduring things than naming them. He nodded once. Pulled the door open. And stopped. She didn't know what made him turn back. She wasn't doing anything that should have stopped him, she hadn't spoken, hadn't moved toward him, hadn't made a sound. She had simply done what she always did when she arrived somewhere that wasn't quite hers, which was to sit on the very edge of the nearest chair, backpack still on both shoulders, her worn plaid jacket still buttoned to the collar, as though she was ready to leave at any moment, as though settling in was a presumption she hadn't earned the right to make. She was looking at her hands in her lap. Her curls, still slightly damp from the snow, had come further loose around her face. She looked smaller than she had on the street, which was saying something, because on the street she had already been trying to take up as little space as possible. She looked like a person who had spent so long not belonging anywhere that she had stopped unpacking. He looked at her hands. Her right hand was resting over her left wrist, not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but in the specific and practiced way of someone covering something they have learned to cover without thinking about it. The jacket sleeve had ridden up slightly on the left side. Just enough. The bruise was faint but unmistakable in the clean light of the apartment, a smudged purple-green impression along the bone, several days old by the color of it, the kind that came from a grip, not a fall. She hadn't noticed him notice. She was still looking at her hands, somewhere else in her thoughts, doing the thing people do when they have learned to be very quiet inside their own heads so the noise of their circumstances doesn't get too loud. He stood in the open doorway for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then he closed the door. Not from the outside. From the inside. He crossed the room without particular hurry and sat down in the other chair, the one angled opposite hers across the low table, far enough to be no kind of threat, close enough to be a presence. He rested his forearms on his knees and looked at nothing in particular, the posture of a man who had decided to be somewhere without requiring the somewhere to explain itself. He said nothing about the bruise. He asked nothing. He did not make it a moment, did not shift the energy of the room into something she would have to manage or deflect or explain away with one of the small, practiced dismissals she kept ready for exactly this. He simply sat down. And the apartment, which had felt like a waiting room when she walked into it, became, almost imperceptibly, without ceremony, something closer to a room with 2 people in it. She didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, one strap of the backpack slid off her shoulder. Just one. But it was something. The night settled around them in layers. She relaxed by degrees, small, almost imperceptible increments that he suspected she wasn't fully aware of making. The second backpack strap came off sometime around the point when she accepted that he was not going to ask her anything, which seemed to be a condition she hadn't encountered often enough to trust immediately. She set the bag on the floor beside the chair rather than in her lap, which he noted without acknowledging. She unbuttoned the top button of the plaid jacket. She pulled her feet up onto the edge of the chair, her worn sneakers tucked beneath her, and wrapped her arms around her knees. She still looked like someone ready to leave. But less ready than before. He had gone to the kitchen at some point and returned with 2 mugs of tea, nothing elaborate, whatever was in the cabinet, which turned out to be a plain green tea that smelled clean and faintly grassy. He set one on the low table in front of her without comment. She looked at it the way she had looked at the apartment when she first walked in, like she was calculating the cost of accepting it, trying to locate the catch. Then she picked it up, wrapped both hands around it, and said, "Thank you." And then, immediately, as though the gratitude had jostled something loose on its way out, "Sorry. I keep saying that." He looked at her. "You have thanked me twice. Both times were appropriate." She blinked. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite a smile but was related to one, the involuntary beginning of it, quickly reined in. "Right," she said. "Sorry." A beat. Then she caught it, and this time the almost smile made it slightly further before she pressed it back. "I just did it again." He said nothing, but he filed it away, the reflexive apology, arriving before she had even completed the thought that prompted it, smooth and automatic as breathing. She said sorry the way people said it when they had been taught, through repetition and consequence, that their presence was an inconvenience requiring constant acknowledgement. It was not a verbal habit. It was a trained response. There was a difference, and he recognized it. He watched her. Not in a way that should have made her uncomfortable. He was practiced enough at observation that he could do it without the quality of surveillance, without the fixed directional stare that announced itself. He watched her the way he watched most things that he hadn't yet fully understood, with a patient, lateral attention that gathered information without demanding it. She was guarded. That was the first and most consistent thing. Every movement slightly contained, every expression arriving half a second after the feeling that caused it, as though there was an internal editor running continuously, reviewing everything before it reached the surface. She had learned somewhere, from someone or from accumulated circumstance, that unfiltered responses were liabilities. But the guard had gaps. When she was not actively monitoring herself, when the tea warmed her hands and the silence held and the immediate fear retreated far enough to stop demanding all of her attention, something else came through. A wryness, quick and unannounced. A quality of noticing things, small things, the specific texture of the room, the way the city lights shifted in the window as the snow thickened, a detail she clocked and then almost commented on and then didn't, but he could see the moment of it in her eyes, the brief illumination before she decided it wasn't worth offering. She was, he thought, quietly funny in the way that people were when humor was the only editorial they allowed themselves, small, private, mostly swallowed before it could be held against them. At some point she reached into her backpack, the automatic, unself-conscious reach of habit, and pulled out a book. It was paperback, the spine cracked and pale from multiple readings, the cover soft at the corners in the way of something carried everywhere for a long time. She seemed to realize what she was doing about halfway through the motion, and he watched her consider putting it back. She kept it, holding it in her lap without opening it, a compromise. He looked at it without making it obvious. The pages were thick with annotation, not just margin notes but underlining, brackets, small arrows connecting passages, question marks beside certain lines. The handwriting was tiny and precise and completely unlike the careless scrawl of someone killing time. It was the handwriting of someone in active conversation with what they were reading. Someone who treated ideas as things worth arguing with. He looked at her. The worn jacket, the edges of her carefully contained expression, the way she held the book like it was one of the few things in her bag that was entirely hers. He looked at the bruise on her wrist, half visible where the sleeve had shifted again. He looked at the door she had glanced at 3 times in the last 20 minutes, not the front door, the bedroom door, which meant she was noting her exits even now, in a space he had told her was safe. She said sorry for things that were not her fault. She flinched, 30 minutes ago, when a car horn sounded from the street below, a brief, sharp contraction, instantly suppressed, followed by the practiced stillness of someone hoping no one noticed the moment of alarm. The world had made something specific of her. Something reduced, apologetic, perpetually provisional. He could see the shape of it the way you could see the shape of a thing from its shadow, not the thing itself but the evidence of what had been pressing on it for a very long time. It did not match her. That was the detail that stayed with him, quiet and insistent, long after the tea went cold. It did not match her at all. Morning came through the window without asking permission, pale and gray and diffuse, the kind of winter light that didn't so much illuminate as reveal, turning everything in the apartment the color of something unfinished. Bianca woke in the chair. She didn't remember deciding to sleep there. She remembered the book in her lap and the tea going cold and the city outside doing its slow, snow-muffled thing, and then nothing until the light. She was still in her jacket. Her backpack was still on the floor beside her, one strap within reach, which told her something about the part of her brain that never fully stood down. She looked across the low table. Hyun-shik was in the other chair, awake, which suggested he had been awake for some time. He had a phone in his hand but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at the window with the same quality of attention he seemed to give most things, patient, unhurried, not requiring the window to perform. She should have left. She knew that in the practical, sensible part of her that was always running calculations. The morning was the agreed boundary. He had said until morning, and morning had arrived, and the correct thing was to thank him and go back to her life, such as it was, and figure out the rest from there. She didn't move. He stood after a moment and went to the kitchen without comment, and she listened to the small sounds of it, water running, the soft percussion of mugs, and felt the strange, specific comfort of sounds that weren't directed at her, weren't a prelude to something she'd need to brace for, were just the ordinary noises of a morning in a room where she happened to be. He came back with tea. Set hers down. Saturday. She picked it up without deliberating this time. I work in a data entry office, she said. She didn't know why she said it. It came out the way things did in the early morning, before the editor was fully running. Tuesdays and Thursdays. The other days I clean offices downtown. The building on Mercer, the tall one with the green glass. She paused. That's where I saw them. The men from last night. I was finishing a floor and they were in the conference room and the door wasn't fully closed. He listened. He didn't fill the space after she finished with reassurance or questions or the particular sound people made when they were preparing their response rather than actually receiving what you'd said. He just let the information settle, and she found that the absence of reaction made her want to keep going rather than stop. I've been trying to be invisible around them for a week, she said. I'm pretty good at that. Being invisible. Something in her voice on the last sentence that she hadn't quite intended, a flatness, a brevity that carried more weight than the words themselves. He looked at her. Not with pity. With the kind of attention that simply acknowledged what it heard. I've had practice, she added, quieter. And then, because the morning was gray and the tea was warm and he had sat back down for no reason she'd asked him to and was looking at her like she was worth the full consideration, something shifted in the careful architecture of how much she was willing to say. She told him about the office on Mercer first, small things, the texture of daily indignity, the supervisor who spoke to her colleagues by name and addressed her as you, the way certain rooms changed when she walked into them. She told it plainly, without drama, observational rather than plaintive. Then she told him about the apartment. The roommates who had made it quietly, persistently clear that her presence was a logistical arrangement rather than a welcome one. The comments about her hair in shared spaces, her food in the refrigerator, the music she played too low for anyone to genuinely object to but that someone always found a reason to mention. Then she told him the real thing. Not a single incident but the shape of a whole accumulated experience, the way it had started in school, early enough that she could no longer locate a version of herself that existed before it. Too loud, they said, though she had learned to be quiet. Too much, though she had learned to take up less. Too dark, said plainly and without embarrassment by people who considered it a neutral observation. The girls who excluded her with a social precision that was almost architectural. The teachers who interpreted her silence as absence of thought rather than its presence. The way it had followed her out of childhood not as a memory but as a methodology, the world had a particular way of handling her, and it had simply updated its instruments as she aged, trading playgrounds for offices, trading cruelty that announced itself for cruelty that smiled. She stopped talking. The mug was almost empty. She became aware, in the silence that followed, that she was waiting for him to say something that would make her regret having said it. Some version of "well, have you tried," or "I'm sure they didn't mean it," or the particular reframe that took the shape of her experience and returned it to her in a smaller, more manageable size. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, "I heard you." 3 words, quietly delivered, no performance in them whatsoever. She looked at him. His expression was the same as it had been, composed, steady, giving nothing away that he hadn't chosen to give. But his eyes held the particular quality she had noticed on the street, that quality of genuine attention, of a person who had been actually present for every word. She looked back at her mug. Something in her chest, a knot she had been carrying so long she'd stopped registering its weight, loosened, just slightly, just enough to notice the difference. Outside the window, the snow had stopped. The city was pale and still and looked, from this height, almost gentle. The knock at the door came mid-morning, 3 measured raps with the particular rhythm of someone who had been told how to announce themselves. Hyun-shik was on his feet before the second knock finished, the movement so automatic it was clearly not a response to this specific situation but a baseline, the permanent readiness of a man who had learned a long time ago that stillness was a choice, not a default. He said something brief in Korean toward the door, and the answer that came back through it seemed to satisfy him. He glanced at Bianca once, not a warning exactly, more an acknowledgement that the room was about to change, and opened it. The man who entered was compact and precise, somewhere in his 40s, with close-cropped hair going silver at the temples and the kind of face that had learned to carry information without leaking it prematurely. He was dressed plainly, nothing that announced itself. He bowed slightly to Hyun-shik, registered Bianca's presence with a single neutral glance that neither dismissed her nor dwelt on her, and began speaking in low, even Korean. She watched Hyun-shik listen. He stood with his arms loose at his sides, his expression doing the thing it did, that composed, receiving stillness, but she had been in his company long enough now to notice gradations within it. There was a quality to his attention that sharpened as the man spoke, a barely perceptible tightening at the corners of his eyes, the kind of thing you would not catch if you were not already paying close attention. She was paying close attention. The man finished. Hyun-shik was quiet for a moment, then spoke several sentences in return, his voice unhurried and low. The man nodded, looked once more at Bianca with that same measured neutrality, and left, pulling the door closed behind him with the careful precision of someone who understood the value of not making unnecessary noise. Hyun-shik stayed where he was for a moment. Then he turned. "The men from last night," he said. "They are not independent." "I know," she said. "They've been in the neighborhood for months. Everyone knows who they work for." She paused. "I just don't know what to call it. What the structure is. They operate under a faction that has been testing boundaries in this part of the city for some time," he said. "Pushing into territory. Quietly, incrementally. Seeing what holds and what gives." His eyes were on her with a directness that felt different from the attentive patience of the morning. This was something more focused, more specific. "They are not simply a street crew. They are a mechanism." She looked at him. "You've been watching them." "I have been watching the edges of what they do. Not the interior." He paused, a fraction. "You have been inside the interior." The sentence landed with a weight she hadn't expected, and she sat with it for a moment, reassembling the last several months through a different frame. The conference room on Mercer. The voices she had absorbed without meaning to, cleaning around men who did not register her as a person capable of retention. The names she had heard and tucked away with the vague discomfort of someone who understands they have overheard something without understanding what they have overheard. "There's a man they call Yeo," she said slowly. I heard that name a lot. He came to the office twice. Everyone got quieter when he was there, even the men who acted like they owned the room. She frowned, pulling at the threads of it. The second time he came, about 3 weeks ago, they were talking about a timeline. Moving something before a window closed. I didn't understand the specifics, but I heard a street name. Caulfield. And a number, the 15th. Hyun-shik went still. Not the ordinary stillness he carried as a baseline. Something beneath that, a deeper, more particular quality of motionlessness, the way a thing stops when all of its energy is suddenly redirected inward. She had said something that meant something, and the specific shape of his stillness told her it meant considerably more than she had known. "What else?" he said. It was quiet, and it was not a question. She told him. She told him everything she had absorbed and set aside and half forgotten over months of being invisible in rooms where conversations happened over her head as though she were furniture. She told him about the shift changes she had noticed, the men who arrived at the Mercer building after hours, the side entrance that was always propped open on Wednesdays, the black car she had seen parked outside 3 times with different plates but the same dent above the rear left wheel. She told him about the phone left on a conference table that had lit up with a name she didn't recognize but had remembered for no reason she could have explained at the time. She told him all of it, and as she spoke, she watched him receive it with a concentrated, unblinking attention that was entirely different from the quality of listening he had given her story that morning. That had been human attention, present, generous, bearing witness. This was something more operational, a mind moving quickly and precisely behind a composed exterior, assembling what she offered into a structure she couldn't fully see. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "Yeo is the interior architect of everything they have been building here," he said finally, his voice measured and deliberate. "The 15th is 4 days from now. Caulfield Street is where my oldest distribution arrangement in this city operates." His eyes settled on hers with a clarity that felt, for the first time, entirely mutual. "They intend to take it." She understood then, fully, without softening, what she had walked into on that street last night, and what she had been walking through for months without a map. Her problem had not intersected with his by accident. They had grown from the same root, in the same soil, tended by the same hands. She was not a frightened girl he had pulled from the cold as an act of passing decency. She was, without having meant to be, the most complete account he had of what was coming. He made the decision quickly, the way she was coming to understand he made most decisions, not impulsively, but with the compressed efficiency of a man who had learned that hesitation had its own costs. He picked up his phone, spoke briefly, and set it down. Then he looked at her with the particular quality of directness that meant something had been settled. "I'm moving you," he said. "There is a place outside the city. Quiet, secure, people I trust. You will be comfortable there until this is resolved." He continued, already moving toward the practical details of it, the logistics assembling themselves visibly in his expression. "It will take a few days at most. You won't have access to the Mercer building in that time, but I can arrange." "No," she said. He stopped. Not with irritation, with the specific stillness of a man who was not accustomed to that word arriving so cleanly from that direction. "I'm not going," she said. Her voice was even. She had not raised it, had not loaded it with the defensive heat that she might have expected from herself, the kind of emphasis that invited being talked down from. She said it the way she'd said "stay with me" on the street, not loudly, but with a weight that didn't leave room for reinterpretation. He studied her. "It is the safest option. For you," she said. "It's the safest option for you. You put me somewhere out of the way, you don't have to factor me in, you handle it cleanly." She paused. "I understand the logic. I'm still not going. Bianca. I have been moved my entire life." The words came out level and clear, and she let them stand for a moment before continuing. "I have been relocated and managed and told to wait somewhere while other people decided things that affected me directly. I have been the person in the other room my whole life. I am not doing it again. She looked at him steadily. Especially not when I'm the one who knows the most about what you're dealing with. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind of that morning. It had an edge to it, not hostile, but taut, two people taking the measure of a disagreement neither had anticipated. He spoke carefully. What you have given me is already useful. You don't need to be further involved too. The man who runs the Wednesday Access, she said. His name is Cho. He's not affiliated the way the others are, he's contracted, which means his loyalty is conditional. He comes in through the side entrance at 9:40 and he's always alone for the first 20 minutes because the man who's supposed to meet him is chronically late. Every Wednesday. For 4 months. Without exception. She held his gaze. I know that because I was mopping that hallway every Wednesday at 9:30 and nobody thought to wonder what I might be noticing. He was very still. There's a woman who does the Mercer Building's administrative work, not for the front businesses, for the other operations. She keeps a paper calendar. I know that because paper doesn't have a password, and it was sitting open on the desk twice when I was cleaning that office. I didn't understand what I was reading then. I do now. She paused. I know which interior door is never locked because the mechanism is broken and they've been meaning to fix it for 2 months. I know which floor they avoid after 11 because the security camera on that corridor actually works, unlike the ones on the floors above it, which haven't recorded anything since October. She stopped. Not because she had run out but because she had made her point and she understood the value of not burying it. This was different from both. This was the look of a man who had built an assessment of someone and was now revising it upward in real time, and who was precise enough to know exactly what that revision meant. You retained all of that, he said. Not a question. I retain most things, she said. People talk freely around me because they're not paying attention to me. They never have been. Something moved through her expression, not bitterness exactly, but the complicated thing that lived in the same neighborhood. It turns out that being overlooked is a very good way to learn things. He was quiet for a moment. Then he set his phone face down on the table, a small gesture, but deliberate, the gesture of a man closing one conversation to be fully present for another. Tell me about Cho, he said. And something shifted in the room, not dramatically, not with announcement, but the way the quality of light shifted when a cloud moved, a subtle but total change in the character of the space. She was no longer a variable he was managing around. She was at the table, and they both understood it. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows on her knees, and told him about Cho. He listened with the full, unguarded attention of a man encountering something he had not expected and had the honesty to recognize. 2 days passed in the particular way that days passed when they were structured around a purpose, quickly in the doing, slowly in the spaces between. A second lieutenant came and went. Maps were consulted, timelines verified, the information Bianca carried reassembled into something operational. Hyun-shik worked with the focused economy of a man in his natural element, and she found herself drawn into the rhythm of it, not passively, not as an observer being occasionally referenced, but as a genuine participant, someone whose knowledge shaped the decisions being made. It was an unfamiliar sensation, being the person in the room whose information mattered, and she kept waiting for it to be revised, for someone to find the boundary of her usefulness and redirect her back to the periphery. It didn't happen. She slept in the bedroom the second night, which felt like a significant renegotiation of something, though neither of them named it as such. The apartment had acquired small traces of occupancy, her book on the table, a second mug established as implicitly hers, her jacket draped over the back of the chair she had claimed without discussion. The impersonal quality of the space had not disappeared exactly, but it had been softened at the edges, the way a room softened when people spent real time in it. On the third morning they were working through the timing of the Wednesday access point, a sequence of movements and positions that needed to align with a precision that left no room for approximation, and she was cross-referencing what she remembered of the building's interior layout against what he had been able to confirm through other means. It was meticulous work, the kind that required sustained attention, and they had been at it for over an hour. The east stairwell, she said, tracing the logic of it. It comes out behind the security desk, not beside it. I know because I pushed a cleaning cart through it once and nearly took out the guard's coffee. She paused. He was furious. Genuinely, disproportionately furious about the coffee specifically. He gave a whole speech. I think he'd been having a bad week and the coffee was just where it all landed. She had not meant it to be funny. She had been thinking about the spatial orientation of the stairwell exit, and the memory had arrived attached to its full context, and she'd relate it as information without editing for tone. But Hyun-shik made a sound. It was brief, barely there, a single quiet exhalation through his nose that contained within it the compressed architecture of a laugh. Not a polite sound, not the social performance of amusement. The real thing, small and involuntary, arrived and gone in under a second. She looked at him. He had already recovered, his expression returning to its composed baseline with the speed of long practice. But he hadn't fully recovered, there was something remaining at the corner of his mouth, a residual quality that hadn't quite resolved, and his eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there a moment before. She understood immediately, from the way he had contained it, that it did not happen often. Not the sound itself but the lapse, the moment of something unguarded making it through. She understood this the way she understood most things about him by now, through accumulated observation rather than direct information. She did not comment on it. She did not smile in a way that acknowledged it, did not file it away visibly, did not do any of the things that would have made him aware it had landed. She simply looked back at the layout in front of her and said, "So the exit position is further right than it appears from the corridor. That changes the sightline." "It does," he said. His voice was even. But the warmth in his eyes did not immediately leave. They worked for another 20 minutes before he said, without particular segue, "I used to want to be an architect." She looked up. He was looking at the layout rather than at her, his expression neutral, the statement delivered with the same tone as any other piece of information exchanged in the last 3 days. As though it were tactical. As though it had not arrived from somewhere entirely different. "Before," he said, and the single word carried a weight of periodization, before as a complete and self-contained era, before as something that no longer required or invited elaboration. She looked at him for a moment. He was still studying the layout, and she understood that he had not looked at her when he said it deliberately, that the not looking was part of how the sentence had been able to leave him at all. "The stairwell," she said. "The way it's positioned relative to the load-bearing walls, whoever designed that building understood compression. You can see it in how the space feels." He looked up then. A pause. Something moved through his expression that was neither the composed professionalism of the last 3 days nor the brief warmth of 30 seconds ago, but a third thing, quieter than both, the specific quality of being understood in a language you had not expected anyone else to speak. "Yes," he said simply. "Exactly that." She looked back at the layout. So did he. The thing between them did not have a name yet. She was not certain she was ready for it to have one. But it was there, present and specific and mutual, and it was, she recognized with a clarity that settled somewhere deep and slightly frightening, not going anywhere. Neither was she. Wednesday arrived the way deadlines did, suddenly present after days of existing only as a point on a timeline, the abstract made immediate and irreversible. She had been given clear instructions. Stay in the apartment. Do not open the door for anyone who did not use the specific knock. 3. Pause. 2. Do not use her phone. Wait. She had agreed to all of it without argument, which seemed to surprise him, and she had not explained that her willingness to wait here was entirely different from every other waiting she had done in her life. This was not being set aside. This was being the reason the whole operation had a shape at all, and she understood the difference at a cellular level. He had left before dawn. She had been awake when he went, she had barely slept, which she suspected he knew, and he had paused at the door in the darkness with the quality of a man assembling something to say. In the end he had said nothing. He had looked at her for a moment with an expression she filed away carefully, and then he was gone, and the apartment was very quiet. She sat with her book. She did not read it. The Mercer Building's side entrance opened at 9:38. She knew this because she had watched it happen every Wednesday for 4 months. Hyun-shik's men were in position 12 minutes before that, arranged around the building's exterior in configurations that would have looked, to anyone not looking carefully, like ordinary city presence: a car, a man on a phone, another adjusting something near a utility panel. Cho arrived at 9:41, alone, as he always was. He did not make it to the interior door. The conversation that followed was brief and, by all accounts, entirely one-sided. Cho was a contracted man, as Bianca had assessed. Conditional loyalty meant conditional courage, and the conditions presented to him that morning made his choice straightforward. He provided 3 things in exchange for the particular mercy of being allowed to simply leave: the name of the interior contact, the confirmation of the timeline, and the location of the arrangement's central documentation, which turned out to be not on the administrative floor she had seen the paper calendar on, but 1 floor below it, in a room that appeared on no building schematic as anything other than storage. The documentation was the architecture of everything, every arrangement the rival faction had constructed in this part of the city over the past 8 months, every hand it had reached into, every payment made and promised, every name that had agreed to look away in exchange for something. It was, in the hands of the right people, the complete dismantling of a carefully built infrastructure. And it was, as of 9:57 on a Wednesday morning, in Hyun-shik's possession. What happened after that moved quickly and without theater. The faction's leadership had operated under the assumption that their arrangement in this territory was invisible, that the months of incremental pressure had gone unnoticed, that their reach into Caulfield Street was days away from completion, and that no one with the standing to stop it had yet understood what was happening. The documentation ended that assumption with a completeness that left nothing to negotiate. It was presented, through channels that required no violence, to the parties whose authority superseded the faction's ambitions. The response was swift and, in Hyun-shik's world, final. The crew that had cornered Bianca in an alley lost its protection before noon. By early afternoon they had lost considerably more than that. She heard the knock at 4:17. 3, pause, 2. She was at the window when he came in, watching the city do its ordinary evening things, lights coming on in the buildings across the way, the slow thickening of traffic below, the sky going from pale gray to the particular deep blue that preceded dark. She turned when the door opened. He looked the same as he always looked. Composed, precise, his dark suit unmarked by whatever the day had required of him. He closed the door behind him and stood for a moment in the entryway, and she understood from the quality of his stillness that it was over, not as a question, just as a fact. She read from his presence the way she had learned to read most things about him, through attention rather than announcement. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her across the length of the room. Outside, the city continued its indifferent noise, horns, wind, the distant percussion of the street, and none of it reached them in here, sealed as they were in the specific quiet that had become, over 4 days, something she recognized as theirs. He had come back. She had known he would, not from certainty about his feelings, which she was still moving carefully around, but from the simpler fact that he was a man who did what he said he would do, and he had not said he was coming back, and yet here he was. And the gap between those 2 things meant something she was not yet ready to say out loud but was no longer pretending not to feel. He crossed the room. Not quickly, not with the compressed urgency of relief. Steadily, the way he moved through most things, as though he had already decided and was simply completing the motion. He stopped in front of her. Close enough that she had to look up slightly, the way she had on the street that first night. Except that nothing about this felt like that night. That night she had been terrified and running and asking a stranger for a mercy she had no right to expect. She was not terrified now. He reached out and tucked a loose curl back from her face, the same strand that was always escaping, the one she never bothered fixing because there was no one to fix it for. His fingers were careful, deliberate, the gesture so quiet it barely announced itself. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. She looked at him, this composed, precise, quietly undone man standing in the warm light of an apartment that had started the week belonging to no one and had slowly, without discussion, become somewhere she recognized, and she felt the knot in her chest, the one that had been loosening in increments since the morning he had simply said "I heard you," release the last of its tension. He had come back not because the situation required it. Not because she was a variable that still needed managing. Not because she had been useful, though she had been. He had come back because she was there. And that, she understood, standing in the quiet with his hands still warm from her hair, was the first time in longer than she could name that someone had chosen to be somewhere specifically because she was in it. Neither of them moved toward the practical things immediately, the tea, the debrief, the next logical step. They simply stayed where they were for a moment, the city outside doing its indifferent work, the apartment holding its new quality of inhabited warmth around them. Then she stepped back, not away from him but into the room, and sat in her chair, the one she had claimed without discussion on the first night, the one that was hers now in the specific way that things became yours without papers or permission. He sat across from her. The low table between them held the accumulated evidence of the last 4 days, her annotated book, its spine thoroughly broken now, a pen resting in the fold. The mug she had established as hers, rinsed and waiting. A notepad from the kitchen drawer that she had pulled out 2 days ago to sketch something while she was thinking, a habit she had not explained and he had not asked about, a loose architectural study of the Mercer Building's layout that had started as a memory aid and become, almost without her noticing, something more considered. A drawing, careful and detailed, the kind of thing her hands did when her mind was working. He looked at these things. Then he looked at her. "I want to tell you what I noticed," he said. "From the beginning. If you'll let me." She regarded him for a moment, the steadiness of him, the particular quality of his attention that she had learned over 4 days was not performance but substance. She nodded, once. He was quiet for a moment, assembling it, and she understood that this was not something he had done before, not the noticing, which she suspected he did always and automatically, but the telling. The choosing to give it to someone. "The first night," he said. "You sat on the edge of the chair with your backpack on. Both straps." He paused. "I have seen people sit like that in waiting rooms, in interrogation rooms, in places they have been told to stay until they are no longer needed. You sat like that in a room I had told you was safe, because safe was not a condition your body knew how to receive without verification. You had been told things were safe before, and they weren't." She said nothing. Her hands were still in her lap. "Your wrist," he said. "The bruise. 3 days old when I saw it, from a grip, not a fall. You covered it without thinking, the way you cover things that people have taught you to keep out of sight." He held her gaze, steady and without apology for seeing it. "I did not ask because asking would have made you responsible for managing my reaction. You had enough to carry." The accuracy of it moved through her quietly, without drama. "You said sorry," he continued, "for things that were not your fault. For thanking me. For existing in a room I had invited you into. Each time it arrived before you had finished the thought, not a habit, a reflex. The kind that forms when apology has been required of you so consistently that you stop waiting for the cause and simply lead with the response." He paused. "You said it 11 times in the first morning. I stopped counting because it became painful to count." She looked at him. Her throat was tight, but she did not look away. "The book," he said, and something in his voice changed, a slight softening, the quality of a man arriving at the part of the inventory he had returned to most often. The handwriting in the margins. Tiny and exact and in genuine conversation with every page, the way a person writes when they take ideas seriously, when their own thoughts feel worth recording. You carried it like it was one of the few things in your life that was entirely and unambiguously yours." He paused. "I think it was." She pressed her lips together briefly. "Held." "You were afraid every moment of the first night," he said, "and you held your own through every moment of it. Not by pretending the fear wasn't there, but by functioning alongside it. That is not a small thing. Most people cannot do it. You did it without appearing to consider that there was an alternative. He stopped. The room was very quiet. Outside, the city had moved into its late evening register, lower, slower, the sharp sounds of the day softened into something more continuous. I have not been alone in a room with someone in a very long time, he said, and the sentence came out differently from the others, slower, more careful, as though it was load-bearing and he was placing it deliberately. There are always people. Always movement, always purpose, always someone who needs something or fears something or wants something from me. I have not minded it. It is the life I built. He looked at her with the full, unguarded quality she had seen only in fragments before, assembled now into something complete. You are the first person in longer than I can accurately remember who made the room feel less full and less empty at the same time. The words landed. She let them. She did not deflect. Did not reach for the small, practiced dismissal that lived ready in her chest for exactly this kind of moment. Did not say I'm sure that's not or you don't have to or any of the 100 ways she had learned to return things that felt too large to keep. She let it land, and she felt the full weight of it, and she stayed with that weight without flinching. You saw me, she said. Her voice was quiet and entirely steady. From the beginning. Before I said anything worth seeing. Yes, he said. Nobody does that. I know, he said. I noticed that too. She looked at him, this precise, composed, quietly unraveling man sitting across a low table in an apartment that had started the week belonging to no one and had become, without ceremony or permission, the place where something true had happened, and she felt, for the first time in longer than she had words for, the specific and unfamiliar sensation of being somewhere she did not need to earn. She reached across the table. Not dramatically, just far enough that her hand rested near his, an offering rather than a claim, something he could meet or not meet entirely on his own terms. He looked at her hand. Then at her face. Then he turned his hand over, and his fingers closed around hers with a quietness that matched everything else about him, certain, unhurried, and entirely without performance. They stayed like that while the city settled into night outside the window. Not because he had rescued her. She had walked toward him. She had asked. She had refused to be moved aside, had brought the thing that broke the operation open, had held her own in every room she had been in all week. Not because she had needed him. She had needed the threat neutralized, and she had contributed as much to that end as anyone. Because he had looked at her on a snowy street and seen something the world had spent years teaching her to hide, and he had sat down, and he had stayed, and he had told her, quietly, completely, without asking for anything in return, exactly what he had found. And she had let him. That was all. That was everything. Outside, the snow had begun again, patient and unhurried, covering the city in the same even white, the alleys and the offices and the streets she had walked alone for years, the corner where she had gripped a backpack strap and said the bravest thing she had ever said to a stranger. Inside, two people who had both, in their own way, been completely alone sat in the warm light of a room that was finally, simply, theirs.